My son forged my signature to steal $3 million from our family restaurants, then hired someone to kill me for the insurance money. At 72, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal this world could offer. I was wrong. When my lawyer's trembling voice shattered the midnight silence with those devastating words, I realized my own flesh and blood had been planning my murder for months. Garrett, the boy I'd groomed to inherit our restaurant empire, had practiced my handwriting until he could sign my name better than I could. He'd taken out massive loans against every property my late wife Catherine and I had built from nothing over 40 years. But the forged signatures were just the beginning. The life insurance policy I'd never signed, the double indemnity clause worth $10 million, the accidental death scheduled for my evening walk through Laurelhurst Park. They thought the old man was powerless, just another trusting father too blind to see the predator living under his own roof. But they never expected what I would do next, and by the time they realized who was really in control, it was already too late to stop me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The phone call came at exactly 11:47 p.m., shattering the peaceful silence of my Portland home. I'd been reading in my favorite armchair, the same one Catherine had given me for our 25th anniversary, when the shrill ring cut through the quiet night like a blade. "Cornelius, you need to sit down." Harrison Reed's voice trembled through the receiver in a way I'd never heard before. In 15 years, as my lawyer, Harrison had always been the picture of composure, even during Catherine's final illness, when we'd handled her estate planning. Tonight, something was terribly wrong. "Harrison, it's nearly midnight. What's happened? It's about Garrett. What I'm about to tell you, it's going to destroy everything you thought you knew about your son." My hands began to shake as I gripped the phone tighter. Garrett, my eldest boy, the one I'd groomed to take over the Whitmore restaurant empire. The chain of 7 restaurants Catherine and I had built from nothing, starting with a single diner on Southeast Division Street 40 years ago. "Just tell me, Harrison. Garrett has been forging your signature. He's taken out massive loans using the restaurants as collateral. All 7 locations, Cornelius. Every single property." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank deeper into Catherine's chair, feeling the leather creak under my weight. "That's impossible," I would have known. I would have had to sign. "He's been practicing your signature for months, maybe years. The banks have copies of what they believe are your authorizations. Garrett has borrowed over $3 million against the Whitmore properties. $3 million. The number echoed in my mind like a death knell. Catherine and I had spent 4 decades building our legacy, working 16-hour days, sacrificing vacations and personal time to create something lasting for our children. Now Harrison was telling me it was all gone. "Where's the money, Harrison? What did he do with $3 million? The pause on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Harrison finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Cryptocurrency investments. He put everything into some digital currency scheme that collapsed 6 months ago. Cornelius, there's nothing left. Worse than nothing. The loans are coming due, and the banks are already making noises about foreclosure." I closed my eyes and tried to process the magnitude of what my son had done. Not just stolen from me, but destroyed everything Catherine and I had worked for. The restaurants weren't just businesses to us. They were our legacy, our gift to our children, our contribution to the Portland community we'd served for decades. "There's more," Harrison continued, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I've been going through the documents the banks sent over. Garrett didn't just forge loan applications. He's been signing your name on insurance papers, tax documents, even what appears to be a new will. A new will," my voice cracked on the words. "A life insurance policy, Cornelius. $5 million with Garrett as the sole beneficiary. The premiums have been automatically deducted from the restaurant accounts for the past 8 months. But here's what's really troubling. The policy includes a double indemnity clause for accidental death." The room began to spin around me. Double indemnity. $10 million if I died in an accident. My son hadn't just stolen my life's work. He'd been planning my death. "Harrison," I managed to whisper, "are you telling me that Garrett is planning to kill me? I'm telling you that we need to meet first thing tomorrow morning. Bring Penelope. We need to figure out how deep this goes, and we need to protect you. Don't go anywhere alone tonight, Cornelius. Don't eat or drink anything Garrett might have access to. And whatever you do, don't let him know that you know." The line went dead, leaving me alone in the sudden silence of my home. Outside, Portland slept peacefully, unaware that the Whitmore restaurant empire was crumbling, unaware that somewhere in this same city my own son might be planning my murder. I sat there in Catherine's chair, staring at the family photos on the mantel. Garrett's college graduation, his wedding day, the grand opening of our fifth restaurant where he'd stood beside me, cutting the ribbon with such pride in his eyes. When had that pride turned to greed? When had my son become a stranger capable of such betrayal? Sleep was impossible after Harrison's call. I spent the remaining hours until dawn pacing my living room, Catherine's voice echoing in my memory from years past. Cornelius, that boy has always been too clever for his own good. Watch him carefully. She'd seen something in Garrett that I'd been too blind to recognize. The way he'd manipulated situations as a child, always finding angles to get what he wanted. I'd called it ambition. Catherine had called it something darker. At 8 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in Harrison's downtown office, the morning Portland drizzle painting gray streaks down the windows. The mahogany conference table between us was covered with documents that represented the destruction of everything I'd built. "Show me the insurance policy," I said, my voice hoarse from a sleepless night. Harrison slid a thick folder across the table. "Cornelius, this isn't just any policy. Look at the beneficiary designation." I opened the folder with trembling fingers. There it was in black and white, a $5 million life insurance policy on Cornelius Whitmore with double indemnity for accidental death. But it was the signature at the bottom that made my blood run cold. It looked exactly like my handwriting. Perfect loops, the distinctive way I crossed my T's, even the slight tremor I'd developed since my heart attack 3 years ago. If I hadn't been sitting in this office learning about it for the first time, I would have sworn I'd signed it myself. "He's been practicing," I whispered. "For months, maybe years," Harrison confirmed. "But Cornelius, there's something else. I called Penelope last night after we spoke. She's on her way here now, but she told me something that made my blood run cold." Before I could ask what he meant, the office door opened and my daughter walked in. Penelope had always been the responsible one, the child who'd inherited Catherine's practical nature and moral compass. While Garrett had been charming his way through college and business deals, Penelope had quietly earned her accounting degree and become the financial backbone of our restaurant operations. "Dad," she said, rushing to embrace me. "Harrison told me everything. I'm so sorry." "Penny, what did you tell Harrison last night?" She sat down across from us, her face pale with worry. "Dad, I've been suspicious about Garrett for weeks. The way he's been asking about your health, your daily routines. And yesterday..." She paused, looking between Harrison and me. "Tell me, sweetheart." "Yesterday I saw Garrett meeting with someone at the Riverside restaurant after closing. I was there doing the monthly inventory when I heard voices in the dining room. I looked through the kitchen window and saw Garrett talking to a man I didn't recognize. A rough-looking guy, not the type who usually comes to our restaurants." Harrison leaned forward. What were they discussing? I couldn't hear everything, but I caught fragments. The man kept saying things like, "Make it look natural, and no one can suspect anything." And then, Dad, I heard Garrett say your name. He said, "The old man takes his evening walk every night at 9. Same route every time." The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. My evening walks. The routine I'd maintained since Catherine's death, walking the same path through Laurelhurst Park every night at 9 p.m. A routine that would make me predictable, vulnerable. "There's more," Penelope continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "When they were leaving, I heard the stranger say, 'Wednesday night, then. Make sure you have an alibi.' Dad, that's tomorrow night. Wednesday night. Less than 24 hours away. My son had scheduled my murder for Wednesday night." Harrison was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Detective Walsh. She specializes in financial crimes, but this has moved way beyond fraud." "Wait," I said, placing my hand on his arm. "If we call the police now, what proof do we have? Forged signatures, suspicious conversations overheard through a kitchen window." Garrett's smart Harrison. "He'll have covered his tracks." "What are you suggesting?" I looked at my daughter, seeing Catherine's strength reflected in her eyes. "I'm suggesting we give Garrett exactly what he wants. Let him think his plan is working." Penelope's eyes widened. "Dad, you can't seriously be thinking of using yourself as bait." "Not bait, sweetheart. A trap. But we're going to need Detective Walsh's help, and we're going to need to be very, very careful." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my life's work. Somewhere out there, my son was finalizing plans to kill me. But Garrett had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the family he was betraying. "Call Detective Walsh," I told Harrison. "Tell her we have a murder to prevent." Detective Miranda Walsh arrived at Harrison's office within 30 minutes, her sharp eyes taking in the documents spread across the conference table with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many family betrayals. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, settling into the chair beside Penelope. "I've reviewed the preliminary information Mr. Reed provided over the phone. This is one of the most calculated cases of financial fraud and conspiracy to commit murder I've encountered." "Detective, what are our options?" I asked. Normally, I'd recommend immediate arrest based on the forged documents alone. But you're right about the murder conspiracy. Without recording the actual solicitation or catching them in the act, a good defense attorney could create reasonable doubt. Harrison spread out a Portland city map on the table. "Cornelius takes his evening walk through Laurelhurst Park every night at 9 p.m. Same route for the past 3 years since Catherine passed. It's isolated enough for an accident, but public enough that Garrett could establish an alibi elsewhere." Detective Walsh studied the map, tracing the walking path with her finger. "Here's what we're going to do. Mr. Whitmore, you're going to maintain your normal routine today and tomorrow. Act as if nothing has changed. Can you do that, Detective? I spent 40 years in the restaurant business, dealing with difficult customers, unreliable suppliers, and health inspectors. I can certainly handle my own son for 24 hours. Penelope reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Dad, I don't like this." "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," Detective Walsh said firmly. "We'll have undercover officers positioned throughout the park. Mr. Whitmore will be wearing a wire, and we'll have surveillance on both Garrett and his associate from this morning until the arrest." "What about the restaurants?" I asked. "If Garrett suspects anything unusual in my behavior, you need to visit the restaurants today, just like always," Detective Walsh explained. "But I want you to make one change to your routine. Instead of going to all 7 locations, I want you to spend extra time at the Riverside restaurant, the one where your daughter witnessed the meeting." Harrison looked puzzled. "Why there, specifically?" "Because," Detective Walsh smiled grimly, "I want Garrett to see his father in the exact location where he planned his murder. Guilty people can't resist returning to significant locations. It makes them nervous, and nervous people make mistakes." I thought about the Riverside restaurant, the newest addition to our chain. Catherine had been so excited about the location right on the Willamette River, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. She'd died just 2 months before we opened it, never getting to see her vision come to life. Now it would be the place where I confronted my son's betrayal. "There's something else," I said slowly. "If we're going to do this, I want to record more than just the murder conspiracy. I want Garrett to admit to the financial fraud, the forged signatures, all of it. Dad," Penelope warned, "that's incredibly dangerous. If he realizes you're wearing a wire, he won't realize it. You see, I know something about Garrett that you don't." I looked around the table at their expectant faces. Garrett has always needed to be the smartest person in the room. His ego won't let him resist explaining exactly how clever he's been. Detective Walsh nodded approvingly. "You want to give him enough rope to hang himself." "Exactly. If I play the confused, hurt father who just wants to understand how this happened, Garrett will tell me everything. He'll want me to appreciate his brilliance before I die." The room fell quiet as the full implications of what we were planning settled in. I was going to spend the next 24 hours acting normally, while knowing my son intended to have me killed. I was going to look Garrett in the eye and pretend I still trusted him, all while wearing a wire that would record his confession. Detective Harrison said quietly, "What happens after we get the confession? We arrest Garrett and his accomplice for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, forgery, and probably a dozen other charges. With the recorded confession and the financial evidence, they'll both be looking at 25 to life. 25 to life. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, would spend the rest of his life in prison." "Mr. Whitmore," Detective Walsh said gently, "I need you to understand that once we start this operation, there's no going back." "Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" I looked at the photographs on Harrison's desk, pictures of his own family, his children and grandchildren. Then I thought about Catherine, about the dreams we'd shared for our restaurant empire, about the legacy we'd wanted to leave. "Detective, my son stopped being my family the moment he decided to kill me for money. Let's catch him." Wednesday afternoon arrived, gray and drizzling, typical Portland weather that matched my somber mood. I'd spent the morning visiting 3 of our restaurants, maintaining my normal routine while the small recording device Detective Walsh had given me pressed against my chest like a guilty secret. Now I stood outside the Riverside restaurant, our crown jewel overlooking the Willamette River. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Garrett moving between tables, checking place settings with the meticulous attention to detail that had once made me so proud. The irony wasn't lost on me. This restaurant, Catherine's final dream, would be where I learned the full extent of my son's betrayal. I took a deep breath and pushed through the front door. The familiar chime announced my arrival, and Garrett looked up from the reservation book with a smile that now seemed sinister rather than welcoming. Dad, perfect timing. I was just going over tonight's reservations. We're completely booked. That's wonderful, son. The word son felt like ash in my mouth, but I forced myself to maintain the facade. Your mother would be so proud of what you've done with this place. Garrett's smile faltered for just a moment, and I wondered if he felt any guilt at all about destroying Catherine's legacy along with mine. Dad, you look tired. Are you feeling all right? The concern in his voice was so perfectly performed that for a heartbeat I almost believed it was genuine. This was the son who'd brought me chicken soup when I had the flu, who'd called every day during my recovery from heart surgery. When had that caring young man been replaced by this calculating stranger? Just the usual aches and pains of getting older, I replied, settling into one of the window seats. You know how it is when you reach my age. Every day could be your last. I watched Garrett's face carefully as I said those words. A flicker of something, anticipation, crossed his features before he composed himself. Don't talk like that, Dad. You've got plenty of good years left. Do I? Sometimes I wonder. Especially lately, I've been thinking about mortality, about what happens to everything we've built when I'm gone. Garrett moved closer, his interest clearly piqued. What do you mean? Well, the restaurants, the legacy your mother and I created. I want to make sure it's all properly arranged. Speaking of which, I've been meaning to ask you about some paperwork I found in my desk. Insurance documents I don't remember signing. For just an instant, Garrett's mask slipped. I saw fear flash in his eyes before he recovered. Insurance documents. Dad, you signed so many papers. The accountants are always bringing you things. Yes, but this was different. A life insurance policy for $5 million, with something called double indemnity. Do you know what that means, Garrett? One? Well, I think it means the payout is doubled if the death is accidental. Exactly. $10 million if I die in an accident. Quite a windfall for my beneficiaries. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. The strange thing is, I don't remember applying for such a large policy. Garrett was sweating now, despite the cool March air. Dad, maybe we should discuss this at home. This isn't really the place. Actually, I think this is the perfect place. After all, this restaurant represents everything your mother and I worked for. It seems fitting to discuss the future here. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the river where evening shadows were beginning to gather. In a few hours, if Detective Walsh was right, someone would try to kill me during my evening walk. Someone hired by the young man standing behind me. Garrett, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course, Dad. What is it? I turned to face him, and for a moment I saw not the calculating murderer, but the little boy who used to help me flip pancakes on Sunday mornings. The child who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd hugged me so tightly when Catherine passed away. Are you in some kind of trouble, financial trouble? The question hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, and he sank into the nearest chair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the river flowed past, indifferent to human betrayal and broken trust. Dad, he started, then stopped. Whatever it is, son, we can work through it together. We're family. That word, family, seemed to break something inside him. When Garrett looked up at me, his eyes were filled with tears, but behind them I could see something else. Not remorse, but resignation. The look of a man who'd been caught and was deciding whether to confess or double down on his lies. Dad, there are things you don't understand. Business pressures, opportunities that required quick decisions. Tell me about the cryptocurrency, Garrett. His head snapped up, and I knew in that instant that Detective Walsh had been right. Guilty people couldn't resist returning to the scene of their crimes, and they couldn't resist the opportunity to explain their cleverness. How did you find out about that? Does it matter? What matters is that you took $3 million of our family's money and gambled it away. What matters is that you forged my signature to do it. Garrett stood up slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was different, colder. The mask was finally coming off. You want to know the truth, Dad? Fine. Let me tell you exactly how smart your son really islanded. Garrett walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his hands surprisingly steady for someone whose world was crumbling. When he turned back to face me, the loving son was completely gone. In his place stood a stranger with my eyes and Catherine's stubborn chin, but none of our values. You want the truth, Dad. Here's the truth. I've been planning this for 2 years. 2 years of watching you shuffle around that house, living off the success that should have been mine by now. The recording device against my chest felt burning hot. Every word was being captured, but I needed more. I needed him to confess to everything. The restaurants were always going to be yours, Garrett. You knew that. He laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the restaurant's windows. Were they? Because every time I suggested modernizing, expanding, bringing the business into the 21st century, you shot me down. That's not how we do things, Garrett. Your mother wouldn't approve, Garrett. So you decided to steal from me instead. I decided to take what was rightfully mine and make it work properly. Do you have any idea how much money we were leaving on the table with your outdated business model? Garrett began pacing his whiskey, forgotten on the bar. This was it. His ego was taking over just as I'd predicted. The cryptocurrency investment wasn't gambling, Dad. It was a calculated risk based on market analysis you couldn't possibly understand. If it had worked, and it should have worked, I would have tripled our money. We'd have been worth $15 million instead of $5 million. But it didn't work. You lost everything. A temporary setback. The insurance policy was always the backup plan. He said it so casually as if discussing the weather. $5 million 10 with the accidental death clause. More than enough to rebuild everything properly. My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to keep him talking. And the forged signatures, child's play. I've been practicing your handwriting since high school, Dad. Remember all those permission slips you were too busy to sign? I got very good at being you on paper. The banks never suspected. Why would they? Cornelius Whitmore, a respected businessman, applying for loans against his own properties. I even wore one of your old suits to the meetings, grayed my hair a little. Amazing how much we look alike when I put my mind to it. The casual way he described his deception was chilling. This wasn't a desperate man who'd made a mistake. This was a predator who'd been systematically destroying his own family. What about tonight, Garrett? What happens during my evening walk? His smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Tonight, the old man who's been showing signs of depression since his wife's death takes a tragic fall into the river during his evening walk. Happens to elderly people all the time. Very sad, very accidental. And you'll have an alibi. I'll be here hosting the monthly managers' meeting. 30 witnesses who will testify that I was discussing quarterly projections when my poor father had his unfortunate accident. I walked to the window, looking out at the river where I was supposed to die in a few hours. The water looked black and cold in the fading light. You hired someone, a professional, someone who understands that accidents need to look convincing. No struggle, no obvious trauma. Just an elderly man who slipped on the wet path and fell into the water. They'll find your body downstream in a few days. And then you collect the insurance money. Then I rebuild the Whitmore empire the right way. Modern restaurants, delivery services, maybe even franchising. Everything you were too scared to try. I turned back to face him, and for the first time since this conversation began, I let my true feelings show. And Penelope. What happens to your sister in this grand plan? Penelope will inherit her share of whatever's left after the debts are paid. She's always been good with numbers. She can help run the new business model. You mean she can help run the business you stole from both of us? Garrett's expression hardened. I mean, she can be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Unlike you, Dad, she understands that sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Your mother would be heartbroken. My mother is dead. The words exploded out of him with such venom that I stepped backward. She's been dead for 3 years, and you've been using her memory as an excuse to let this business stagnate ever since. She built this empire with me, Garrett. Every restaurant, every recipe, every tradition, every outdated policy that's been holding us back. He moved closer, his face flushed with anger. You want to know what Mom would think? She'd think you've been a weak, sentimental fool who let grief cloud his business judgment. That was the moment I knew my son was truly lost. Catherine had been the heart of our family, the moral center that had guided every decision we'd made. To hear Garrett speak of her with such contempt was like watching him spit on her grave. I think we're done here, I said quietly. Oh no, Dad, we're not done. You see, there's been a change of plans. The menace in his voice made me freeze. What do you mean? I mean you're not making it to your evening walk tonight. I mean this conversation has convinced me that waiting is too dangerous. You know too much, and you're not as senile as I hoped. Garrett reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small bottle. Heart medication. Yours, actually. I've been gradually replacing your pills with something a little stronger. Amazing what you can buy online these days. My hand instinctively went to my chest where my real heart medication sat in my shirt pocket. The medication Detective Walsh had replaced with harmless placebos this morning. One of these dissolved in your whiskey, and you'll have a very peaceful heart attack. Right here in the restaurant you loved so much. Very poetic, don't you think? He was moving toward the bar, toward the bottle of whiskey he'd poured earlier. In a few seconds he would drug me, and all of Detective Walsh's careful planning would be for nothing. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. The soft chime of the restaurant's front door opening. "We're closed," Garrett called out sharply, not taking his eyes off me or the bottle of whiskey he was reaching for. But the footsteps continued across the dining room floor, deliberate and unhurried. I recognized that walk, Detective Walsh, right on schedule. "Mr. Whitmore," her voice carried across the restaurant. "I'm Detective Walsh, Portland Police. We need to talk." Garrett's hand froze halfway to the whiskey bottle. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, fear, then calculating rage as he realized what had happened. "You're wearing a wire," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Every word, son. Every single confession. Don't call me son." The bottle of fake heart medication flew from his hand, shattering against the window. "You set me up, your own flesh and blood, no Garrett. You set yourself up the moment you decided money was worth more than family." Detective Walsh was getting closer, but she was still too far away when Garrett lunged at me with surprising speed. The impact sent both of us crashing into a table, chairs scattering as we hit the floor. Despite being 30 years younger, Garrett had spent his adult life behind a desk, while I'd maintained the physical demands of restaurant work well into my 60s. When he threw a wild punch at my face, I managed to catch his wrist and twist, using his momentum against him. "Dad, stop fighting this," he gasped, trying to break free. "Just let it happen. Make it easy on yourself. Like you made it easy on your mother when she was dying. Like you made it easy on me when you stole everything we built." We rolled across the floor, knocking over a chair. Garrett managed to get on top of me, his hands reaching for my throat, but I brought my knee up hard into his stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air. "Portland Police, step away from Mr. Whitmore." Detective Walsh's voice cut through our struggle, but Garrett wasn't finished. He scrambled toward the bar, grabbing a heavy glass ashtray from the counter. "You destroyed everything," he screamed, raising the ashtray above his head. 40 years of your pathetic small-time thinking. I could have made us rich." "We were rich, Garrett. Rich in ways you'll never understand." He brought the ashtray down hard, but I rolled to the side and it shattered against the floor where my head had been moments before. Glass fragments scattered across the hardwood, some of them cutting through my shirt sleeve. Freeze dropped the weapon. Detective Walsh had her service pistol drawn, but she couldn't get a clear shot with Garrett and me so close together. 2 more officers burst through the front door, their boots crunching on broken glass as they moved to flank us. Garrett looked around wildly, realizing he was trapped. But instead of surrendering, he did something that chilled me to the bone. He smiled. "You think you've won, old man? You think this changes anything?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a cell phone. "One text message and my associate completes the job anyway. Maybe not tonight, maybe not this week, but eventually. You can't have police protection forever." "Actually, we can arrange that," Detective Walsh said calmly. "Your associate was arrested 2 hours ago trying to purchase the equipment for tonight's accident." Turns out he was an undercover federal agent. The phone slipped from Garrett's fingers, clattering across the floor. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked truly defeated. "That's impossible." I vetted him carefully. "I paid him $20,000. You paid $20,000 to an FBI agent running a sting operation on murder-for-hire schemes. Congratulations, Garrett. You're not just a fraud, an attempted murderer. You're also incredibly stupid." The fight went out of him completely. He sank to his knees among the broken glass, his expensive suit torn and dirty. When the officers moved in to handcuff him, he didn't resist. "Garrett Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, forgery, and attempted assault. You have the right to remain silent." As Detective Walsh read him his rights, Garrett looked up at me one last time. I expected to see hatred in his eyes, or at least defiance. Instead, I saw something that might have been regret. "Dad, I never meant for it to go this far. The business, the money. It was supposed to be simple. Murder is never simple, son. And neither is forgiveness." The officers led him toward the door, past the tables where Catherine and I had hosted so many celebrations, past the windows where we'd watched countless Portland sunsets together. Our family's legacy, built on love and hard work, had nearly been destroyed by greed and betrayal. But as I watched my son disappear into the back of a police car, I realized something important. The restaurants could be saved, the debts could be managed, and the Whitmore name could be rebuilt. Some things, however, could never be repaired. The aftermath of Garrett's arrest felt surreal. Paramedics checked the cuts on my arm while crime scene technicians photographed the broken glass and overturned furniture. The riverside restaurant Catherine's dream made manifest had become the scene of my son's final betrayal. Detective Walsh sat across from me at one of the undamaged tables, her notepad filled with details that would seal Garrett's fate in court. The recording device I'd worn had captured everything, every confession, every threat, every cold calculation that had led to this moment. Mr. Whitmore, are you sure you don't want to go to the hospital? That was quite a physical altercation for someone your age. I'm fine, Detective. Bruised pride heals slower than bruised ribs. She smiled grimly. The recording is crystal clear. Between the financial evidence Harrison Reed provided and Garrett's confession, the district attorney says this is one of the strongest cases she's seen. Through the restaurant's windows, I could see news vans pulling up outside. Word had already spread that the heir to the Whitmore restaurant empire had been arrested for attempting to murder his own father. By tomorrow, our family's private tragedy would be Portland's public scandal. What happens now, Garrett will be held without bail, flight risk and danger to the community. The federal charges for the murder for hire will be handled separately, but he's looking at 25 to life on the state charges alone. 25 to life. The boy who'd once helped me paint the sign for our first restaurant would spend the rest of his productive years in prison. Detective, I need to ask you something. How long have you known about the FBI operation? We've been tracking online murder for hire schemes for 6 months. When Harrison Reed called us about the insurance policy and suspicious meetings, we realized Garrett had stumbled into an ongoing federal investigation. The timing was fortunate. For you, not for him. The front door chimed again, and Penelope rushed in her face, streaked with tears. She'd been waiting at the police station, ready to provide backup testimony if needed. Dad, are you hurt? She threw her arms around me, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the comfort of unconditional family love. I'm okay, sweetheart. It's over. The restaurant's Dad. What happens to the business now? Detective Walsh looked up from her notes. The forged loans are a civil matter. With Garrett's confession and the evidence of fraud, the banks will likely work with you on restructuring the debt. It won't be easy, but the Whitmore name still means something in this city. I thought about the 7 restaurants Catherine and I had built, each one a testament to our shared vision. Garrett had nearly destroyed them with his greed, but they could be saved. The question was whether I had the energy to start over at 72. Mr. Whitmore, Detective Walsh continued, there's something else you should know. When we searched Garrett's apartment, we found detailed plans for expanding his scheme. He'd been researching other family businesses, other elderly owners he could potentially target after you were gone. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My son hadn't just planned to kill me. He'd planned to make murder his business model. He was going to do this to other families. The FBI believes so. Your willingness to wear that wire and get his confession may have prevented multiple murders. Penelope squeezed my hand tighter. Dad, you're a hero. No, sweetheart. I'm just a father who finally saw his son clearly. Detective Walsh closed her notepad and stood up. We'll need you to testify at trial, but that won't be for several months. In the meantime, try to focus on rebuilding your business and your life. After she left, Penelope and I sat in the quiet restaurant as Portland's evening lights began to twinkle beyond the windows. The same view Catherine had loved, the same dream she'd had for this place. Dad, what are we going to do about the restaurants? I looked around at the dining room where my son had confessed to planning my murder, where he'd spoken of his mother with such contempt, where our family had finally irrevocably broken apart. We're going to save them, Penny. All of them. Your mother didn't spend 40 years building this legacy, so it could die with my mistakes. Your mistakes, Dad. You trusted your son. That's not a mistake. That's what fathers do. Maybe, but I should have seen the signs earlier. Your mother did. She always worried about Garrett's character. Penelope was quiet for a long moment. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said years ago. What is it, Mom knew? About Garrett's nature, I mean. She used to tell me that some people are born with something missing inside them, something that makes them unable to truly love anyone but themselves. She said it wasn't our fault, and it wasn't his fault, but it was our reality. Why didn't she ever say anything to me? Because she knew you needed to believe in him. She said that's what good fathers do. They love their children unconditionally, even when those children don't deserve it. I felt tears threatening for the first time since this ordeal began. Catherine, even in death, had been trying to protect me from a truth she'd seen long before I was ready to accept it. She was right, you know, Penelope continued, about good fathers. and about unconditional love. The difference is now you know where to direct it. She was right. I had another child, one who'd inherited Catherine's integrity and work ethic, one who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. Are you ready to run a restaurant empire, Penelope? With you, absolutely. But Dad, we're going to do it our way, Mom's way, with integrity and family values, and no cryptocurrency investments. For the first time in days, I heard her laugh. Definitely no cryptocurrency. 6 months later, I sat in the same Portland courthouse where Catherine and I had finalized our adoption of Penelope 30 years earlier. Today, however, I wasn't here to celebrate new beginnings. I was here to witness the end of my relationship with my eldest son. The trial had been a media sensation. Restaurant Airplot's father's murder had dominated local headlines for weeks. Harrison Reed had done his best to shield me from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the public nature of our family's destruction. Garrett sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his once pristine appearance now haggard from months in county jail. He'd lost weight, and his hair had gone completely gray. When he looked back at me during breaks in testimony, I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. The state calls Cornelius Whitmore to the witness stand. I walked to the front of the courtroom on unsteady legs, my hand trembling slightly as I placed it on the Bible to swear my oath. In the gallery, Penelope gave me an encouraging nod. She'd been my strength throughout this ordeal, taking over day-to-day operations of the restaurants while I dealt with lawyers and testimony preparation. Mr. Whitmore, the prosecutor began, please tell the court about the evening of March 15th when you confronted the defendant. For the next hour I recounted the entire story. The midnight phone call from Harrison, the discovery of the forged documents, the insurance policy, and finally the recorded confession at the Riverside restaurant. The jury listened with rapt attention as the audio recording played Garrett's voice, filling the courtroom with his cold calculations about my murder. And when the defendant said, "One text message, and my associate completes the job anyway," what did you understand him to mean? I understood that, even if his plan failed that night, he intended to have me killed eventually. My life was worth $10 million to him, and he wasn't going to give up that easily. The defense attorney's cross-examination was perfunctory. How do you defend against a recorded confession? How do you explain away forged signatures and murder-for-hire schemes? Garrett's lawyer did his best, painting a picture of a desperate man overwhelmed by financial pressure, but the evidence was overwhelming. When it came time for victim impact statements, I stood once again at the podium looking directly at my son for what I knew would be the last time. Your Honor, 43 years ago, Catherine and I brought home a baby boy we named Garrett. We loved that child unconditionally. We gave him every opportunity, every advantage we could provide. We taught him right from wrong, or at least we tried to. Garrett's head was down, but I could see his shoulders shaking. The man sitting at that table is not the son we raised. I don't know when Garrett died and this stranger took his place, but I know it wasn't our fault. Some people are born with something missing inside them, the ability to truly love others more than themselves. I paused, remembering Catherine's words that Penelope had shared with me. My wife Catherine built those restaurants as a legacy for our children. Garrett tried to destroy that legacy for money, but what he didn't understand is that our real legacy isn't buildings or bank accounts. It's the values we pass down, the integrity we maintain, the love we show for others. Garrett chose money over family. He chose greed over love. He chose murder over morality. Those were his choices, and now he must live with the consequences. The judge sentenced Garrett to 25 years to life on the state charges, with the federal murder-for-hire charges to be served consecutively. He would be eligible for parole when he was 65 if he lived that long. As the bailiff led him away in shackles, Garrett looked back at me one final time. His lips moved, and I thought he might be saying, "I'm sorry," but I couldn't be sure. It didn't matter anymore. Outside, the courthouse reporters shouted questions that I didn't answer. Penelope and I walked to our car in silence, the weight of justice served, but family destroyed heavy on our shoulders. "How are the restaurants doing?" I asked as we drove through downtown Portland. "Better than expected. The publicity was awful at first, but people respect the way you handled everything. Reservations are actually up 15% from last year, and the debt restructuring Harrison worked out a payment plan with the banks. It'll take 5 years to clear everything Garrett stole, but we'll manage. The Riverside location is especially popular now. People want to eat where the dramatic confrontation happened." I shook my head. "Your mother would have hated being part of a tourist attraction. Maybe. But she would have loved seeing the restaurants survive and thrive despite everything." That evening, Penelope and I stood in the Riverside restaurant after closing, looking out at the Willamette River where I was supposed to have died 6 months ago. The dining room had been completely renovated after the damage from our fight, but Catherine's vision remained intact. Dad, I've been thinking about expanding the business. Oh, more restaurants. No, something different. A culinary school. We could teach young people not just cooking and restaurant management, but business ethics, how to build something lasting without compromising your integrity. I smiled, thinking of Catherine's reaction to such an idea. The Catherine Whitmore Culinary Institute, exactly. What do you think? I think your mother would be proud. And I think it's exactly the kind of legacy she would have wanted. As we locked up the restaurant and walked to our cars, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine hope for the future. Garrett had tried to destroy our family's legacy, but he'd failed. The Whitmore name would survive, carried forward by a daughter who understood that true success isn't measured in dollars, but in the positive impact you have on others. The restaurants would continue. The family would heal. And somewhere in a prison cell, my son would have the rest of his life to contemplate the difference between the love he'd thrown away and the money he'd valued more. Justice had been served. Now it was time to rebuild. As I sit here today, 2 years after that terrible night at the Riverside restaurant, I often think about the phone call that changed everything. Harrison's trembling voice at 11:47 p.m., shattering my peaceful evening and my illusions about my son. The Catherine Whitmore Culinary Institute opened last month in a renovated warehouse in southeast Portland. Penelope designed every detail, from the state-of-the-art kitchens to the ethics classroom where we teach young entrepreneurs that success built on integrity lasts longer than wealth built on deception. Our first class has 24 students, all of them eager to learn not just the technical skills of restaurant management, but the moral foundation that makes a business truly successful. When I watch them work, I see Catherine's dream taking new form, not just feeding people, but nurturing the next generation of ethical business leaders. The 7 Whitmore restaurants are thriving under Penelope's leadership. She kept every tradition Catherine and I established while modernizing our operations in ways that honor our values rather than compromise them. The debt from Garrett's theft will be fully paid off next year ahead of schedule. I still live in the same house on Maple Street where this story began. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what signs I missed, what moments of intervention might have saved my son from the path he chose. But I've learned that some people make choices that no amount of love or guidance can prevent. Garrett writes to me occasionally from the state penitentiary. His letters are filled with apologies and explanations, attempts to justify what can never be justified. I don't respond. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. But I've also learned that families can heal, that legacies can survive betrayal, and that love, real love, always finds a way to continue. Penelope's children, my grandchildren, visit the restaurants regularly. They help in the kitchens, learn family recipes, and carry forward the values Catherine and I tried to instill in all our children. The story I've shared with you today isn't just about one family's tragedy. It's about the choices we all make between love and greed, between integrity and easy money, between building something lasting and grabbing something quick. In business as in life, there are no shortcuts to genuine success. The wealth that matters, the respect of your community, the love of your family, the satisfaction of work, well done, can't be stolen or forged or murdered for. It can only be earned through years of consistent ethical behavior. My son thought he could take everything I'd built and make it his own through deception and violence. What he discovered too late is that a legacy isn't something you can steal. It's something you have to earn, one honest decision at a time. If this story has touched your heart, if it's made you think about your own family relationships or business ethics, please share it with others. Leave a comment about your own experiences with family trust and the difficult choices we all face between doing what's right and doing what's easy. And remember, the most valuable inheritance you can leave your children isn't money or property. It's the example of a life lived with integrity, compassion, and unwavering moral courage. Thank you for listening to my story. May you never need the lessons it teaches, but may you remember them if you do. The hardest lesson I learned through this ordeal is that love alone cannot change someone who chooses not to be changed. As parents, as family members, we want to believe that our unconditional love can transform even the darkest hearts. But sometimes people make choices that place them beyond the reach of love, beyond the possibility of redemption. This doesn't mean we stop loving them. It means we learn to love them from a distance to protect ourselves and others from the damage they might cause. True family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care for one another's well-being. In business and in life, integrity isn't just a nice ideal, it's a practical necessity. The shortcuts that seem attractive in the short term inevitably lead to long-term destruction. Build your legacy on solid ground, not shifting sand. Catherine used to say that we plant trees not for our own shade, but for the shade of future generations. The Whitmore restaurants, the Culinary Institute, the values we've passed down to Penelope and her children, these are the trees that will outlast any individual betrayal or tragedy. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is not wealth or opportunity, but the example of how to respond to life's deepest betrayals with grace and moral courage. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.